Okay, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me in this webinar on enhancing your communities with a community champion program. Though many of you will know me, those of you who don't, my name is Rob Ellis and I'm the digital community manager for the Fulbrighter platform. Over the last year since we've launched Fulbrighter, I've had feedback from commissions that says the kind of technical training in how to use Fulbrighter has been useful, but actually what commissions really need is a broader understanding of community management best practice and how they can use Fulbrighter and some of the other feeds they use to best engage with their communities. As a result of this, over the coming year, we'll be programming a number of webinars to help you think about community management more generally. This first webinar is going to be mostly me talking, but I very much hope that future webinars will involve guest speakers and also opportunities for commissions to share best practice and discuss issues with each other. In terms of just some very quick housekeeping, this webinar is going to last between around 30 to 40 minutes of formal talking. Then there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. The webinar is being recorded and I'll share a recording of you later. So don't forget you have to take lots of notes and listen to my every word. I'll also be sharing a copy of the slide deck as well after the session. So in terms of what we're going to do today, we're going to kick off by just doing some very brief introductions. We're then going to think about what community champions are and the value they can bring to your organization. We're then going to talk about some of the practical steps you can employ to recruit, train, incentivize your champions. And then, as I said, we'll close with some questions and discussion. While this session is going to be primarily me talking, I'm delighted to welcome Miley, who's going to be joining us to bring some expertise into this session as well. Miley is a member of the Fulbridge community. Some of you may know Fulbridge already. If you don't, Miley will introduce it in a moment. But the key thing about Fulbridge is it is a grassroots, granting alumni-led platform that has, over the last 5 years or so, built a really strong community amongst alumni and grantees. And through doing that, they've developed some really strong expertise in how to build communities among Fulbrighters and some of the issues and concerns that Fulbrighters have. And I'm delighted that Miley is here to share some of her wisdom and expertise with us over the course of this session. But I'll now quickly hand over to Miley to give a very quick introduction to the Fulbridge project.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So yes, as Rob said, I am a member of Fulbridge. Fulbridge, our goal really is to build bridges between Fulbrighters, to expand their knowledge and understanding, and to empower them to serve the world, not just as Fulbrighters, but as people who partake in international exchange. We were founded in 2015, and we've kind of grown into a small group of ETAs, into a larger team that encompasses members that are ETAs, researchers, scholars, Fulbright specialists. So we do really emphasize our tagline as for grantees by grantees, for alumni by alumni. We are a grassroots effort. Our team is completely made up of alumni or current grantees. And we mostly put on outreach or professional development programs. We have research workshops, career chats, blogs, Fulbright spotlights, and those are completely run by Fulbrighters, interviewing other Fulbrighters, reaching out to people from different cohorts, different years. And we do have a physical website. It's on the screen now, fulbridge.org. But we are also kind of a community-based organization. So we are very active on Instagram, and that's how most of our members interact with each other. And there is a lot of Instagram engagement, and that's mostly where we're active. But we have been working with the Fulbrighter Network before and since their launch in 2019. Our founder, Zoe, who is a South Korean ETA, she likes to describe our involvement with the Fulbrighter Network as Like the Fulbrighter Network is a community center. It is a place where Fulbrighters go to see what's going on in the Fulbrighter community, and Fullbridge is sort of like a group that makes sure that there's a lot of events going on. Like it makes the platform an exciting place to go. So we're very much about connecting grantees and alumni very actively, and connecting Fulbright incoming grantees, current grantees, and alumni with resources, opportunities, and engagement to learn about the world.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Miley. And as I said, Miley will be sort of popping in throughout this session to give some of the Fulbrighter perspective on some of the topics we're going to be talking about. So the focus on this session is around community champions. I want to quickly kick off with a shared understanding of what we mean by community champions. So these are the people that have an emotional attachment to the work that your commission does, and also that they're willing to act on your behalf. So they believe in what you do, but also they're willing to act and support you in meeting your mission and aims. So they're typically your most engaged alumni grantees, and they're the ones that are happy to promote your vision and mission to the wider world. Now, I suspect all of you in this call now already use community champions in some form or another, whether that's supporting you with outreach activities, whether that's organising alumni reunions, whether that's sitting on interview panels, whether that's contributing blogs or articles for your website or newsletters. There's a range of ways in which you make use of some of your most engaged alumni and grantees to really strengthen the communities that you build. The purpose of this session really is to think about how we can best make use of that resource, best make use of our community champions to build powerful communities, whether that's within Fulbrighter, within our social media spaces, or within physical events once we move back to those. And essentially what we're talking about here is a mode of communication which emphasizes peer-to-peer dialogue rather than organizational to Fulbrighter dialogue. So a lot of what goes on in Fulbrighter is top-down. So it's the commissions talking to their alumni, commission talking to their grantees. The purpose of community champions is it allows peer-to-peer or Fulbrighter to Fulbrighter conversations and communities to be built. Now, these sort of peer-to-peer networks have a range of benefits. I've just outlined a couple on this slide. So the first is it really fosters authentic and relevant interactions based on common experiences. Through peer-to-peer, through Fulbrighter to Fulbrighter conversations, they can have shared experiences. Their shared experience of being a Fulbrighter becomes a focus of their communications and their activity. It can promote open dialogue and strong communities. There are topics that are suitable for peer-to-peer discussion, which might not be so suitable for commission to Fulbrighter discussion. And finally, I think this is most important, a well-managed community champion program, a well-managed peer-to-peer community can really reduce a significant burden on commissions and other central organizations. If you have a team of community champions that you trust and that can undertake some of your mission and activity for you, that will reduce the amount of activity that needs to happen centrally. So thinking about something like outreach, for example, the more you can rely on your alumni and grantees to undertake that, the less central coordination is required. So that's some of the advantages of thinking about how we harness peer-to-peer networks rather than just organizational down networks. And again, I want to turn over to Miley at this point. Obviously, Fulbridge is very much founded on this concept of peer-to-peer, Fulbrighter to Fulbrighter connections. And I just wonder, Miley, looking at that slide, whether there's anything you'd add there about the benefits of peer-to-peer networking.
Yeah, I think that these are all wonderful points. I think just to expand, I think that prioritizing person-to-person connections is like the bread and butter of international exchange. It's kind of what we all hope to get out of this experience, is connecting with others on a personal level. And I think that one of the most important aspects of the peer-to-peer relationship is encouraging voices within the Fulbright community that are diverse and understanding of diverse experiences, whether that's like different identities, different mindsets, different views on the world, and encouraging those diverse voices are important to impact future engagement from diverse groups, from people who may not think that Fulbright is right for them or may have some concerns being of a certain identity, engaging in this like academic rigorous program. It shows the diversity of the Fulbright program and like what we as grantees have to offer and why we are all different and unique individuals. And it makes having the peer-to-peer relationship kind of makes Fulbright as an institution less like an institution. It provides a network that emphasizes, again, the people relationship, but it makes Fulbright not just a line on a resume or just like something to list on a CV, but it makes like the experience more rounded, and it makes grantees feel more loyal to their commissions or to the experience as a whole. And that's all I think I would like to add.
I think that's perfectly phrased, Miley. I think people sometimes talk about Fulbrighter being like a family, or using metaphors that go beyond the traditional institutional brand. And I think that's very well put. And I think most of us have probably agreed with everything that's been said so far. I think we all recognize the value of these peer-to-peer networks and the value of empowering our alumni and grantees to really take on some of this leadership work. I think the follow-up question then, which I know many of you have raised with me, is how do you make them do this? How do you encourage them to become champions? How do you nurture them? How do you recruit them? And how do you enable them to take something like Fulbrighter and take an active role in building a community within it, or using your social feeds or events or other activities? And that's what I want to focus on for the second half of this webinar. Now, I don't want to get bogged down too much in communications theory, but there is a bit of research that I'd like to talk about for a few minutes now, because I think it's really helpful in understanding what community champions can be and how to best manage them. So this is a piece of research that I've kind of adapted and tweaked a little to better suit the context of Fulbrighter. If you want to find out more about the research, I've included the link on the slide and I'll circulate that later. But essentially what this research did was identified personas who take on the role of community champion. So types of people who like to step up to being community champion, and what these type of people share, their concerns, their visions, their incentives. And breaking down community champions into these personas gives us a better insight into what motivates them and how we can best incentivize them. So this research identified 4 personas that are part of a community champion. So there's the educators, the validators, the progression or status seekers, and the collaborators. I want to spend just a little bit of time exploring what these different personas mean. So the educator. The educator is someone who wants to share experiences, they want to share helpful tips and provide best practice in their field. They tend to be enthusiastic, eager to help, and have a strong understanding of the Fulbright program. And so this persona is particularly valuable at delivering outreach activities, providing mentoring opportunities for new grantees, or delivering continuing professional development opportunities for recently returned alumni or more substantial alumni. And I think this persona is particularly apposite for the Fulbright program, because we do have this strong community who want to give back, who want to provide support and advice for Fulbrights in whatever stage of their Fulbright journey they are: potential applicant, grantee, recent alumni, established alumni. So that's one type of persona you can think about when you're managing community champions. Second one is validator. Now, I think this is not so crucial to think about Fulbright, but these are people who want to give feedback and provide suggestions. They are articulate, credible, and honest, and they're particularly used for providing testimonials and short form case studies. So obviously this research is about broad communities, so also thinking about business, and validators are particularly valuable to businesses because they can provide testimonials about products and services. So while we do use validators in the Fulbright ecosystem, I don't think they're a crucial persona within this diagram. But one I think is crucial is this progression or status seeker persona. So these are people who want to grow their own academic, creative or professional identity. They tend to be ambitious, influential, and typically are early on in their career. And so these people are particularly effective at delivering subject matter expertise and subject matter interventions. So providing thought leadership, delivering webinars on their research, providing keynote talks, joining TEDx panels, these sort of occasions where they get to share their research in the public sphere. And then the final persona here is the collaborator. So these are ones who are actually interested in how your organization is run and is managed. They want to get involved in your organization and its strategic development. They tend to be influential, passionate, and well-connected at a senior level. And so they're effective at serving on advisory boards or strategic reviews of your activity. Now, obviously, those 4 personas are a simplified version of the many competing priorities and types of people you will find in your Fulbright communities. And equally, there's obviously some overlap in these personas. A single alumni or grantee could be both an educator and a status seeker. There can be this overlap. But I think when it comes for us to think about collectively what our alumni grantees get from being community champions, what they're looking for and what they need to thrive in these community champions roles, these personas are a really helpful way of thinking about what their needs and incentives are. So that's just a bit of research theory on the community champion idea. I now want to turn to specifically looking at ways in which you can build your own program with your community champions to enhance what they do. So I said earlier that many of you already work with community champions, and I'm sure every commission here uses alumni and grantees for certain activities that they get up to. So what's the difference between using these community champions and having some form of community champion program? Well, a program is about taking your community champions and providing some sort of formalized and structured approach to how you work with them. So it's moving from ad hoc arrangements you might have to formalized processes. And this is about clarifying and codifying your expectations of them and what their responsibilities will be. And I think this is really crucial. I've been guilty of this in the past, that you can recruit ambassadors, you can recruit volunteers. But if you don't provide them with a structure for what they have to do, they don't always know what's appropriate for them to do. They don't know what's expected for them to do, and they struggle to really provide the kind of support you need. The more you provide a structure and templates, the easier it will be for them to adapt and meet your needs. And what do we mean when we talk about these kind of formalized processes and structures? Well, it include things like coming up with a defined role profile for community champions with role titles. So actually specifying what you need from them in a job description, essentially. It can include delivering training and incentive schemes to support their development. And finally, and crucially, I'll say a bit more about this later, it's about providing regular communications from the Commission to your community champions, but also allowing them to access collaborative spaces where they can work together and feel like the role of community champion is somehow formalized within the hierarchy of what the commissions do. And that's really about taking what might seem ad hoc relationships you have with lots of alumni and grantees and providing some clarity around structure, expectations, and responsibilities. In terms of why this is so important, I think a successful champion program works when 2 aspects intersect. One is the mission and identity of your commission. So what your mission is, what your strategic priorities are, what your needs and desires are on the one hand, and on the other hand, the needs and ambitions of your champions. If they align perfectly, you're going to build rich, engaging communities thanks to your community champions, because you'll be speaking the same language with your champions and you'll be working towards the same end goals. So it's that point of intersection which is most rich. And just to give a sense of what I mean by that in practice, to go back to these personas, we talked about the validator persona earlier. This is a persona that is primarily used to give testimonials or to provide case studies. It's typically used in the marketing sphere to sell products and services. Now, obviously, this role is often used within Fulbright. If I go to many of the Fulbright Commission's websites, you're greeted on the front page with a smiling face of an alumni or grantee with a short sentence telling them how the Fulbright experience transformed their life. And of course, this is entirely appropriate, and I'm sure you reach out to your alumni and grantees for this often. However, if you're asking someone whose persona is primarily as an educator or as a progression seeker to solely provide testimonials for you, you're not going to be building a strong relationship with that alumni and grantee because they aren't motivated by giving testimonials or short form case studies. That's not where their needs and ambitions lie. Rather, in the case of educators, their need is to be able to counsel and support others, or in the progression seekers, their need is to be able to develop and enhance their career. So when you're thinking about how to use community champions, you need to be thinking about how your needs meet the needs of these alumni and grantees. So for example, you could have someone running outreach workshop for you who is a typically educator persona, and as part of that, you ask them to write a brief summary of it for your website, which includes their reflections on it and a quote you can use elsewhere on your website as a testimonial. So rather than limiting them to just asking for a testimonial, you play to their strengths as educators and get a testimonial out of them that way. And that's what I mean by the alignment between the needs, understanding what your alumni and grantees would get out of a community championship role, and how that meets what your strategic priorities are as a commission. So I want to close by just thinking about some practical next steps in terms of how you can recruit and also nurture your champions. So how you can incentivize them to support you, how you can encourage them to deliver strong work in whatever field they're helping you in. I think there are 3 primary approaches to recruiting champions. The first is you as a commission identify people you think would be good candidates and approach them and invite them to serve with you in whatever role you think would be best suited for them. Identifying your most engaged members is easy. You can use a variety of tools. So it could be people who regularly come to events you organize. It could be members of alumni organizations. You will also find that I provide for each commission with a list of who your most active users in the Fulbrighter platform are. Again, this is a good place where you could find relevant community champions because these are people who are actively using the platform, posting, commenting. So those names might be good to approach. A second strategy for recruiting your champions is to run a dedicated recruitment campaign at a specific point in the year. It might be as grants come to an end and recent grantees are returning to their home countries. That's a good point to set out a call for community champions to take on specific voluntary roles. And again, you could use an application shortlisting and interview process as part of that to ensure you attract the most talented and appropriate alumni to be those community champions. And then the final option is just making sure that somewhere on your website or elsewhere, you have a get involved area where at any point in the year, someone could email you and say, I'd really like to conduct some outreach activity, or I'd really like to run a webinar series on this topic, making sure you're open to those sort of approaches. Now, which of these strategies that you use, which blend of these strategies you use, will very much depend on you as a commission and your current relationship with your alumni and grantees. I think the first strategy has a lot to recommend it because it's personal. You're reaching out to specific individuals, so you're already building a relationship. And equally, you've already pre-vetted them in a way. You've already seen them performing well. You've already seen them undergoing community champion activities. So you've got some trust in their abilities. So I think that's a valuable approach, but any blend of these may work in your situation. And that's how you actually get community champions on board. Getting them on board is in many respects the easiest part. What's trickier is then cultivating them. making sure they feel empowered to build these communities, make sure they understand your mission, and make sure they're willing to give back to the organization. And I think when thinking about cultivating, I kind of want to go back to those personas I talked about earlier, because what the personas allow you to do is understand the different needs and incentives that different community champions might have. For example, to turn back to the educators persona, we can think about their needs and their incentives. In terms of their needs, if these are people you want to be going out and counselling and supporting grantees, prospective applicants, or recent alumni, they need to have an understanding of the training needs, the outreach activities you want, and the broad context of what the Commission's target goals are. They need resources to aid them in outreach and training, e.g. they need a high-res logo of the Commission. They might want a PowerPoint template you can provide them with, key web links or emails that they should be giving out when they start talking to people. They might need specific technology, a Zoom account or mentoring software. And they have the need to learn from others. Educators typically value building a community of practice, working with others in the field, understanding how they can best deliver training, mentoring, or advice and guidance. But the second part of this puzzle, the incentives, is, I think, even more crucial. How do you encourage your community champions to be engaged, to be proactive, to be thoughtful? I used to work in higher education with 18 to 21-year-olds, and 18 to 21-year-olds are great. If you give them a $10 Amazon voucher, they're yours forever. You can ask them to do anything and they'll do it very happily. And that's wonderful, that's easy. When we're dealing with Fulbrighters, we need a more professionalized incentive program. What's interesting, I think, is the research that identified these personas, the educator, the collaborator, etc., also thought about what the incentives would be for this group, and they undertook some surveying of community champions. And for this educators group, the primary incentive, which 66% of educators interviewed cited, was all they wanted was recognition. For example, an email from the executive director or the US ambassador, an invite to an exclusive drinks reception, something which essentially gave them a very formalized pat on the back for the work they'd done, a recognition of their value to the organization. Another group of educators said actually what their incentive was seeing the impact of the work they do. So having these rewarding outcomes, discovering the positive impact that their contributions have made. So that's about you as a commission being able to share with them. For example, if you invite an educator to run a professional development webinar, making sure you share the feedback with them at the end. If they're doing outreach activity, make sure you share some of the Commission's data about how your outreach program has increased diversity of applicants or whatever your strategic priority was. Allowing them to see that impact is the thing that will keep them coming back and engaging with your community management structures. But also it's true that educators did value financial compensation, but typically this wasn't in the form of a voucher. It was a compensation that reflected their professional contribution. So for example, covering their travel expenses, covering the cost of a Zoom license, for example, something that reflected the expenses they put into this project. So that's on the educator's persona, some of the ways you can cultivate and train them. The second group I want to think about is the progression seekers. So these are the ones that are typically early on in their academic or professional career and are looking for ways to enhance who they are and their professional identity. So this group's needs are being able to engage with relevant and meaningful audiences and developing new and important contacts. One of their needs is to enhance their resume. They want to add some of their experience onto the resume so it makes them look a more employable prospect. But they also need some infrastructure to be able to share their research and other activities. For example, a blogging platform, webinars, social media highlights, opportunities for them to talk about what they do. And for this group, the incentives are slightly different. So one of the key incentives for this group is being given a relevant, prestigious, and transferable role title. What I mean by this is don't just call them community champions. Call them things like commissioning editor if there's someone that is gathering content for a blog or something, community manager if they're running a group for you, guest expert if they're attending a webinar. This is language that they can take and adapt to put on their resumes, to put on other forms of social capital to help them progress in their careers. Another incentive is the opportunity to build networks and gain meaningful contacts. And that last incentive is around career progression. The point of those two slides is to really indicate how within a community champion program, you might have a real varied array of people and motivations. What they need to get out of the activity they do for you will differ. These progression seekers tend to require something more formalized, something which gives them status and kudos. The educators, for example, just want to thank you at the end of it. And so that can help you think about how as a commission, you can be incentivizing your community champions into delivering some high quality engagement activity. So this is my last slide. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on this slide. Obviously, after this slide, we'll have time for any questions you might have, but equally, if you've got any best practice you've used or any concerns, you can type that in the Q&A box if you have a full question, or if you just put a note in the chat and say you want me to unmute you so you can ask your question directly, feel free to do that. But I wanted to end with some possible next steps. Now, it's always difficult for me to come up with meaningful next steps because every commission is so different. Your maturity when it comes to engaging with your alumni, your maturity when it comes to community management differs from commission to commission. So being able to provide one size fits all guidance is difficult. Instead, I've kind of outlined two possible next approaches you could do, a simple and an advanced. Now, obviously, I'm also happy to have conversations after this webinar with you to focus more specifically on where your commission's currently at and what your commission could do. Equally, I know that the team at Fulbridge is always happy to advise and support activities you might have. But let's look at the simple one first. So this might be for a commission that has very, very limited contact with its alumni and grantees, has very little community champion activity as it stands. So here's some simple steps. First, just identify 5 community champions. Don't worry about those personas. Don't worry about the diversity of those champions. Just kickstart yourself with 5 names. And as I said earlier, all the commissions that are active in Fulbrighter, I've shared with you a list of your most active and engaged users. That's usually between 5 or 10 users. They could be a perfect place for you to start in contacting these community champions and getting them aligned with your mission. You can then draft a brief profile for these champions. And I'm going to circulate after this webinar a kind of template job description that you could use to encourage them to engage. And then just set them 3 simple tasks. And again, this is about giving them a structure and a formula which allows them to understand what your needs and requirements are. Now, I've suggested 3 tasks there. You can come up with your own ones, but very simple tasks like organizing a virtual coffee date for alumni, profiling a recent publication or an output from another alumni from your commission, or brainstorming with you what they'd like from a commission community, what they hope to get from Fulbrighter or from your social media feeds. And what you'll see there is those 3 tasks are all very simple. They're all defined, quite clear tasks, but they also all appeal to different aspects of that persona modeling we talked about earlier. So you've got the more sociable activities, the more status building activity, and then the collaborator strategic thinking activity. So that's a very simple approach that if you just want to kickstart a community champion program, start with 5, start with 3 simple tasks, and then you can see how it develops. For those of you at a more advanced stage, so those of you that already use community champions quite substantially, so you already have active collaborations with your alumni grantees, here's some possible next steps that you could pick up. First, you could think about identifying what champion roles you might need and drafting role profiles. So this is about digging more deeply into how your champions might work with you. So rather than just using this nebulous concept of a community champion, it's thinking about what specific roles you might need to support your activity. So that might be regional reps within your country. If you have very clear divisions by state or by regions, You might want an alumni in each of those to coordinate activity. It might be an events manager. It might be a content editor. Whatever you think you need, provide some structured profiles for those activities. And second, and I think this is really crucial, is building a space where these champions can collaborate and can access key resources. Now, that could be something as sophisticated as a Fulbrighter group, or it could just be something simple like a Slack channel. The advantage of this is making them feel like they are part of their own exclusive community of champions. It gives them easier access to you in commissions, but it also allows you to share some key resources for them. So there are very, very simple wins, like making sure they all have access to a logo for your commission, a high-res version of the Fulbright logo. I still see so many presentations going out that have really granulated logos or the old Fulbright logo. And that's because alumni and community champions don't always have access to what you in the commission might have access to. And then think about some key deliverables that you want from your community champions. And again, when thinking of these, you want to be uniting your own mission and vision as a community with the needs and the incentives that will appeal to these community champions. And again, I've just given some examples. It might be you want to have an outreach event at an HE institution in each region within your country. That might be a priority to support diversity, to support moving your Fulbright program away from the capital of the country into the regions. So that might be one activity you want to undertake. You might encourage them to create free career advice webinars for recently returned alumni and grantees to think about how they can progress in their careers. You put someone in charge of recruiting some speakers and thinking about how that could function. Or you could start a virtual book group. I know that I think Belgium already has a book group going on where they're talking about some fiction that comes out on the diversity work they're doing. And that's a great way of providing a more formalized, consistent touch point with your community champions and with your alumni. So again, this will differ from commission to commission, and you might find that there are other priorities you have. Those are very much just ideas, but that's a way of thinking about the simple or advanced approach to upscaling your engagement with community champions. So that's very much everything I'm going to say. The point of this webinar is really to emphasize the value of building peer-to-peer communities where your Fulbright alumni and grantees are placed in a position of ownership and leadership over what goes on. That has benefits, and I've also outlined some of the ways you can start to nurture and develop that community based around thinking about what the needs and incentives are of your community champions that you might recruit. So at that point,